So for my third U.S. history video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the invasion of Iraq post 9/11. Now, the official reasons that we were told that we invaded Iraq there was two main ones. The first one is that there were suspected weapons of mass destruction, which were known as WMD, and then the second one was that there were alleged connections between Al-Qaeda, who were responsible for the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and between the Iraqi regime under Saddam Hussein, the dictator at the time that we invaded. But there's a few interesting things. Well, the first thing to point out is that the reason that we had suspected was because that they might have been developing weapons of mass destruction is because earlier there had been use of biochemical weapons in the Persian Gulf War, some gases, and we were fearful that they might have been developing some weaponry to use against us that was weapons of mass, that was a nuclear technology was what we had originally been fearing. And when we sent in UN weapons inspectors to investigate and check out and make sure, as they claimed that they weren't developing any nuclear weapons, they had been turned away, and there was some concerns there. And then the other aspect is that they had thought, or at least the American people had been told that Iraq had, under Saddam Hussein, had connections to Al-Qaeda. But the interesting thing is that in our textbook, it says, Bush accused the Iraqi regime of all manner of wrongdoing, oppressing its own people, frustrating the weapons inspectors, developing nuclear and chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction referred to as WMD, and supporting terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. The reasons were laid out right there. And later you find out, though, as you read about the Abu Ghraib, sorry if that pronunciation is wrong, exacerbation of tensions, you find out that Al-Qaeda had no link to Iraq under Saddam, as Bush has falsely alleged. So the reason for, although to be fair, the weapons inspectors were repeatedly harassed during their inspections, but the American people were told that the invasion was due to a fear of a terrorist threats from Iraq, and the fact of the matter is that there was no terrorist connection between Iraq under Saddam, although later, as it points out, the terrorists did move in, which I'll get into in a minute. But that means that the main reason that we were told that we invaded Iraq, which was that the fear of a terrorist threat from them, wasn't valid. So I was interested in why it is exactly that we would have invaded Iraq if if it was false that there was any terrorist threat. And it turns out that according to Alan Greenspan, which was the Federal Reserve chairman, he said, "I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everybody knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil." So that does make sense. There was rising oil prices at the time, and Iraq is a major source of oil. But it's just an interesting thing to point out that the economic value of oil was one of the actual main reasons, but that was not how it was presented to the people of the United States. It was presented as a terrorist threat. Another little thing that I want to get into is the outcome of invading Iraq. So I talked for a second, I just mentioned the Abu Ghraib prison incident, and essentially there were some prisoners that were embarrassed. They weren't necessarily physically abused, but they were made to put women's underwear on their heads, and other things that were extremely sensitive to their culture. And this created a sense of outrage amongst the people. And at the endings of Saddam's regime, the Sunni and the Shia, I'm sorry, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but the Sunni and the Shia Muslims, ethnic groups, had already been battling for the control of their government, and this just exacerbated tension. So now you had these two groups of people who were fighting with Americans, the American soldiers, because they were angry at how the prisoners in the Abu Ghraib prison were treated, and the Al-Qaeda was able to move in and kind of make a presence there under the new anti-American kind of hatred that was being instilled. So the invasion of Iraq, I'm sorry, the invasion of Iraq under the pretense of terrorism was false, but it did lead to a presence of terrorism in Iraq. So I thought that was just an interesting thing to talk about, as well as the fact that one of the main reasons behind the invasion of Iraq was actually due to oil and not due to any true evidence of a correlation between the Saddam regime and Al-Qaeda. So yeah, that's my video for this week.